In this video, I'll show you how to synthesize an 808 bass from scratch using Meld, and it's going to sound like this. The fun part about the synthesizer is you actually have a lot of different options when it comes to making 808s. You can use this to create all sorts of different 808 sounds, or to even create a wide variety of different kick drums just by shortening up the sustain. So if you're curious what these notes are, here's that simple pattern. Basically, it's a descending pattern, kind of focused around G, and I believe that's in G major. Let's take a look. Yep, looks like it's in G major. Perfect. And I'll make sure to include that MIDI with the course materials as well. If you're curious and want to go ahead and download that. Okay, so let's load up a new copy of Meld. I'm going to go over here in Ableton and grab and drag and drop that in. We will turn this down to -9.4. There we go. And then now we have our simple patch. I'm going to turn off those drums and we'll get started. So the first thing that we need to do is adjust our main waveform here. We're going to turn off waveform B for now, but we are going to be using both waves on the synthesizers today. And we need to make kind of a basic kick drum patch. So what we'll do is keep the sine wave, but I want to add just a little bit more texture. If we look at the order of these different waveforms, it starts off in a sine wave and ends up on a square. Now I could blend between them by adjusting this. So I can add just a little bit more overtones into my waveform by boosting this up just a little bit. Let's do like 0.8. So now I have just a little bit more harmonic overtones from that triangle wave, but it's pretty subtle, but it just has a little bit more texture, which is nice, especially because we will be distorting this. That texture will come in handy a little bit later. Now let's go over to our wave, and I want to go ahead and change this over to the LP crunch. So let's go to low pass filters, and we want to go to low pass 12 decibel crunch. This basically is a similar low pass filter, but it gives us this added option to add some distortion through this drive control. And that gives me the ability to really add some nice texture and to make it a little bit more aggressive. Right now, this doesn't really sound like an 808, it just sounds like a sine wave with some additional harmonics. So let's go ahead and make a few adjustments to make this more of like a kick drum sound. So the first thing we'll do is go to our amplifier envelope, which is going to control the volume of our whole sound. And by the way, we'll also link this envelope so that way A and B are going to be the same. So if I make a change here, you'll see that reflected over here. We want to go and make sure the sustain is set down. I just want to reduce this a little bit to like -14. So it starts off a little bit louder and then dies out. And then kind of holds at this sort of medium value here. Let's also add a little bit of release. We'll do like 148, I think would sound nice. There we go. And then we can go ahead and shorten up that decay as well, so it's a little bit shorter of a kick drum sound, so it's going down from the higher volume to lower volume or a little bit faster. We'll do that at about 80 milliseconds or so, 80.7. Then the next thing that we'll do that'll give us a little bit more of a kick drum style sound is going to be adjusting our modulation envelope. This will be applied to the pitch modulation of this oscillator, and that's really where the main kick of our sound is going to come from. So let's go to the modulation matrix. Then we will go over to the pitch mod section. So go to pitch mod for oscillator A. And then we're going to go to the modulation envelope, go to pitch mod, and go ahead and put that up. See, now you can hear. Gives us more of a kick drum sound. So it starts off at a higher pitch and then pitches down to the note that we're actually holding. Let's go ahead and put this at 25.5. So it kind of goes up just a little bit. And then moves down, giving us that kick drum sound. But let's go back to our modulation envelope here and really shorten this up. So we're going to put our decay down rather substantially to like 122. And then we can even go to that modulation point here, the slope, and go ahead and crank that up quite a bit. Put it all the way up to 100 actually. So that way it's super short. So we get this very short, snappy curve. There we go. Now we have much more of a kick drum style sound. Then let's go ahead and turn on the other wave. We'll use this just to add a little bit of texture. So I'm going to add in one of these interesting waves here. It's going to be the swarm saws. So we'll go to the swarm saw and go ahead and leave that on its default settings here. Kind of gives us this sort of like weird texture wave. We have this on the state variable filter and turn that down so that we're filtering out those high frequencies. So it's giving us just a little bit more texture on everything. Let's also make sure that the modulation matrix and the pitch mod also matches the other waves. So people do, again, let's see, what was it? 25.5. So we're almost using this swarm saws as more of like a texture on top, whereas this one just gives us a little bit more harmonics. We could also reduce this just a little bit because once we start saturating everything, this will get quite a bit louder. Let's also crank that volume up quite a bit. So even though it's turned down quite a bit, just adds in a touch of overtones on top of it. Now let's go over to the polyphony section and we'll change this over to mono. Don't want legato, so that way it re-triggers. Every time I have overlapping notes, it'll re-trigger that whole sound, keeping it nice and kick drum sounding. And then we're going to go over to the stack, change it over to 3, so we have 3 copies of the waves, and then spread them. So now we get a little bit of stereo width on our whole sound, which is nice. We don't do much of that, so let's do 25. There we go. That sounds nice. And then where the real texture and color of everything is going to come from is this drive. So we're just going to crank that all the way up. And now our 808 really starts to come to life. So that spread really adds a nice kind of unison, chorusing sound to everything. And especially this wave now adds almost like this kind of Reese bass type tone to the overall synth. So it was pretty subtle beforehand, but once we saturate and drive everything together, it becomes a lot more interesting. We can go ahead and leave that output volume where it's at by default because we'll be saturating this again here in a moment. So don't worry about that, but if you need to adjust the overall volume of the whole 808, you can adjust that there. Okay, so the next thing that we will do is add in the filter inside of Ableton, and I'll show you a really cool way of actually adding in some really great distortion for 808s. So take that resonance and turn that down, crank that filter frequency all the way up. So basically it's rolling off just a little bit of top end, but it's not really much of an effect. It does tighten it up just a little bit, but the effect is pretty subtle. The thing that we're looking for here is going to be the OSR filter. So this is more of like an analog modeled filter, and it gives us the ability to add this overdrive. It's very similar to this low pass crunch filter that we have inside of the synthesizer patch. And this gives you a very nice like mid-range distortion or any kind of drum or percussion part. So it's really adding this nice mid-range distortion without sort of blowing out the highs. So we'll do 13.5. Let's see where we are so far. If you wanted this to be more of a kick drum, all you have to do is go over to this amplifier envelope section and just reduce that sustain all the way down to 0, and then you just have a regular kick. Okay, but back to our effects. So the last thing that we will do is add in just a little bit of saturation and widening in parallel to our sound. This will give us the ability to really kind of bring this 808 to life by adding in just a little bit more processing. So this melt synthesizer has these really nice tones that it can generate, but then once you start saturating and processing them with the built-in Ableton effects, that's where the patches in here really come alive. Okay, so let's go ahead and grab a EQ, and I'm gonna go ahead and type in EQ. And we're gonna run this in parallel, so I'm gonna hit Command or Control and G to group everything. Or you could just right click on a device and hit group, by the way. And you can see the key command is right there. We can name this distortion, or just DIST for short. And then we could call this a dry. And by the way, I'm just right clicking and hitting create chain, by the way. We have a dry chain, and then we can name this distortion or effects. And then on this channel here, we also want to add in a saturation device and a chorus. And then what we're going to do here is chop out all the low stuff that we don't need. And really just kind of roll off everything. So that's at 84.8, 0.30 on the Q. You can even take out some of that top end with a shelf as well. That's at 2.61K at -6 with a Q of 0.71. And that's basically just going to enable us to really saturate this rather heavily without kind of having too much harsh high frequency. So then just take that saturator, crank it up so we get nice distortion. Do like 22 or so, 23 would also be nice, maybe just a little more. So that's 23.3. And then we'll take that output down. And then the final thing that we will do is add in that chorus. Add just a little bit less of that. Let's do like 32 maybe. And let's have that be 100% dry wet. And go ahead and put the rate at 3.12, so that way the modulation is happening a little bit faster. That just adds in some nice width, and then listen to what this sounds like in parallel. Maybe cut out a little bit more of that bass on the parallel channel here. And that gives us a really nice widened 808. And we did so by adding in some saturation and widening with that chorus. So before, our effects sounded like this, and then after it sounds like this. So by combining the built-in effects devices with the Meld synthesizer, you're really unlocking a lot more complex sounds in terms of what you can get out of the synthesizer. Okay, so the final sound altogether sounds like this. That is all for this 808 bass line from scratch using the Meld synthesizer. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see ya in the next one.